Hey you're watching a clip from the DynamiteGizmo podcast. This is not the full episode, but if you want to see the full episode, make sure to click the link in the description. And remember, like, comment, subscribe. Do it now. Here's the clip. I need to talk about RDR and DDP, Dricus Du Plessis, and Reinier de Ridder. Now this is something I've brought up before, but with the fight approaching quickly, and since we're already on the topic of backup fighters, it's worth getting into again. As much as the Dricus Du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev matchup is one of the most anticipated fights of the year, and one that fans around the world are eagerly looking forward to, there's still one major factor we need to consider before we get too excited. That factor is Khamzat himself, and more specifically, his ability, or should I say inability, to actually show up for main events. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at his UFC career. Khamzat has had 8 fights in the UFC so far, and has won every single one. That's impressive. But what's equally important is the fact that there have been 5 other occasions where he was scheduled to fight, and all of those fell through, and each of them were main events. Let's go back to December of 2020. Khamzat was scheduled to headline a card against Leon Edwards, but Edwards tested positive for COVID-19. And the event was canceled. Okay, fair enough. All right, Leon got COVID. Okay, have to cancel, whatever. The fight was then rebooked for January of 2021. This time, it was Khamzat who caught COVID. He hadn't recovered in time and had to pull out. The UFC rescheduled the bout once again for March of 2021. But Khamzat was still dealing with lingering effects of the illness, so once again the event was scrapped. Okay. Now, to be fair, none of that was really Khamzat's fault or Leon's fault. The illness is an illness. You can't really control that. He was seriously affected by COVID, and it kept him out of action for months. So yes, we gave him the benefit of the doubt for that. After recovering, he came back and fought 3 more times between 2021 and 2022, winning all of them dominantly. Then came a major moment in UFC history. Nate Diaz versus Khamzat Chimaev, scheduled to headline UFC 279, a main event, by the way, and it was a numbered card, a main event on a main numbered pay-per-view. And here's what made it so unusual. There was no title on the line. These were just 2 big names headlining a pay-per-view. Why? Because Nate Diaz was entering the final fight of his UFC contract, and the UFC wanted to match him up against a surging monster. Someone who could potentially derail his exit and elevate themselves by beating a legend. And at the time, Khamzat was an undefeated phenomenon, coming off a series of dominant wins and considered one of the most exciting prospects in years. Despite no belt being at stake, the fight was promoted as a spectacle. A sort of passing of the torch moment if Chimaev could take out the seasoned veteran that was Nathan Diaz. And of course, Nate Diaz's name value alone guaranteed pay-per-view buys. He's a star. He brings eyes to any card that he's on. But guess what? This time, Khamzat was to blame. At the weigh-ins, Khamzat missed weight by 7.5 pounds, a massive miss for a 170-pound bout. The UFC had to scramble at the last minute to reshuffle the entire main event, Luckily, Tony Ferguson stepped in, and Diaz ended up fighting him instead. It was fucking disappointing chaos. Then, in June of last year, Khamzat had yet another opportunity to headline a major event, this time against Robert Whittaker, in the main event of the Riyadh season card in Saudi Arabia. And once again, the main event didn't happen. Khamzat reportedly developed a severe illness, and the UFC had to replace him with Ikram Aliskerov. He eventually did face Whittaker later that year at UFC 308 in October, but that fight was not a main event. So let's tally this up. Every single time Khamzat Chimaev has been booked to headline a UFC main event, it's fallen apart. He is currently 0 for 5 on actually making it to the main event spotlight. Whether it's due to illness, weight issues, or unforeseen circumstances, he cannot make a main event. And that brings us to today. With Dricus versus Khamzat on the horizon, we are once again holding our breath. Will Khamzat make it to fight night? Will he make weight, or will something else go wrong? Now let's imagine for a moment that he cannot fight. There's been an unofficial rumor, which we did talk about, that Caio himself may be stepping in as the backup fighter. But what if that doesn't happen? What if someone else actually steps up? What if it's RDR? Okay, just think about it. What if? All right, and let's just play complete hypothetical. All right, let's say Caio is actually the backup, because it isn't actually official, but let's say he is, okay? We're going to assume he's telling the truth, okay? But push it aside and let's just do a hypothetical situation. What if it was RDR? What if RDR was the one? RDR just picked up his 4th dominant win in the UFC at middleweight and has now jumped 8 spots in the ranking, landing him at the number 5 position, ahead of Caio. So what if the UFC gave him the shot? It would make a lot of sense. It would sell. And honestly, it would be one of the goofiest, most unpredictable matchups we've ever seen. And most exciting. Okay, both of these fighters, RDR and DDP, are known for their complete unorthodox, offbeat, borderline chaotic styles. They fight like nobody else. Even Tom Aspinall has said that Dricus is his favorite fighter to watch simply because he has no idea what he's going to do next.
It's a good, yeah, but mate, I love his style though, you know.
Yeah.
I think he is the most interesting guy to watch in the UFC because I watch him and it just doesn't make sense for me.
Yeah.
I can't see what he's doing. He'll do like a head kick into like a low single. You're just like, what? But what I really like what you do is like, you throw that.
You see, Dricus Du Plessis is Tom Aspinall's favorite fighter, and he said it time and time again. And RDR is exactly the same way in terms of goofy styles. It's like watching 2 Looney Tunes characters scramble in a cartoon dust cloud. Seeing them both in there together it'd be pure madness, chaotic brilliance, an absolute must-see entertainment. But beyond the style matchup, here's something even more interesting. Both of these guys are massive for middleweight. The division's weight cap is 185 pounds, but Dricus walks around anywhere between 224 to 231 pounds. That means he's cutting nearly 50 pounds to make weight. And RDR, before entering the UFC, he was simultaneously the middleweight and the light heavyweight champion in one championship. He even went on to face an interim heavyweight title holder. These two are huge for the division. And it begs the question, is that size advantage a major factor in determining their dominance in the middleweight division? Because here's the kicker. Neither of them have lost in the UFC. Dricus is a perfect 9-0, and RDR is sitting at 4-0. A fight between them wouldn't just be unpredictable, it would answer some real questions about the future of the division. It would test size, chaos, cardio, adaptability, and as much as I would love to see Dricus face Caio, and I really hope that fight does happen eventually, DDP versus RDR would fucking feed nations, dude. That shit would be so crispy, clean, creamy, dude. I would love to see that shit. God, that would be such a good fight. And I imagine it's going to happen soon regardless of whatever happens after 319. I think what's going to happen is, okay, if Khamzat and DDP does actually happen, if Khamzat actually does make weight, and if he actually shows up and they fight and DDP wins, I think the winner between Caio and Imavov will then fight for the middleweight title, and then whoever wins that, then we'll see RDR show up and fight whoever has the belt at that point, which will probably still be DDP, but who knows? It might be like everyone's, this DDP and Khamzat matchup, it's very, very fucking hard to determine any way this could go. Because Khamzat could win. He very well could win. It's not like Khamzat is just going to get smoked by DDP. He could fucking win. And I wouldn't be disappointed if he did, because I love Khamzat. And at the beginning of this year, when I made my predictions of who would have the belt, he was who I said was going to get the middleweight title. And I've been wrong so far about every single prediction I made. I predicted that Diego would have the title, but at that time we didn't know he was even going to fight for the title. And yada yada. I went over this before. But I think even if DDP loses against Khamzat, I think there will still be an RDR versus DDP fight in the future, which would be so sick. That'd be so sick to see, dude. But anyway, let me ask you a few questions about this topic. Do you think Khamzat Chimaev will actually make the Dricus fight this time based off of his entire UFC career and never showing up to a main event after having the opportunity 5 times? And if Khamzat pulls out, who would you rather see step in, Caio Borralho or RDR?